right, guys, to break down the very latest in terms of the midterm election landscape, we turn to two great old friends of the show for a little panel action here. We've got Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky in the house to break it all down. Great to see you guys.
Good to see you, friends.
The panel back in effect.
Yes, yeah, we haven't been doing the panels lately.
We haven't. I can't say I missed it, but with these two, I did miss that.
Yeah,
so,
you know,
like,
people really like it, especially as you get close to elections and there's like poll data to dive into, which is exactly what we're going to do today. So let me give you two of the latest polls, both of which I think are a bit outliers, but are interesting nonetheless. Let's go ahead and put the first one up on the screen here. So this is in Wisconsin, where you have Evers, the governor, up over slightly over the Republican. This is like the Trump-backed guy. I don't even know how you say his last name. Michaels. Anyway. While you have Mandela Barnes, the Democrat, in the Senate race, up 51-44 over Ron Johnson. So that would be a potential pickup for Democrats in Wisconsin. That is not something anyone really expected to be talking about at this point in the election cycle. And then the other one, which we've been talking about relentlessly because it's just so damn much fun, is over in Pennsylvania. Let's go ahead and put this next one up on the screen. New poll with huge margins for both of the Democrats in the governor's race and in the Senate race. You've got Fetterman up 18 points over Oz, and you have Shapiro up 15 points over Mastriano. Now, again, I think both of these polls, guys, are outliers, but certainly Fetterman in the average of polls, Ryan, has been up roughly 10 points, somewhere around there. He's been, cracking 50%. So he looks like he's in pretty decent shape at this point. We haven't checked in with you guys for a while. So Ryan, if you could just start by kind of giving your high level view of how you think the midterms stand right now.
Well, I think there's been a massive swing in, say, the last month or so, like the period after the Dobbs decision, where Democrats spent something, they spent something like, 2 months from the time the decision was leaked until they finally put out what they were going to do in response to the decision. And in that gap, Democratic voters felt like the sucking vacuum of an empty Democratic Party. And you could just see people just kind of slowly backing away into the bush, to use that like Homer Simpson. They're like, you know what? We fought so hard for this party. We got Trump out of office. We put these Democrats in, and they're just not going to do anything. And I think actually Kansas really changed the game for Democrats across the board, because they're flat on their back in Brooklyn, and they see people in Kansas kind of standing up for their own reproductive rights. And Kansas holds a really kind of symbolic place in the heart of America for both parties. And I think to see that started giving them energy, and then at the same time you get Manchin back on board, and they sign off and they do their whatever they're calling it now, the Inflation Reduction Act. And so finally it looks like they're doing something. And so I think that has brought back a lot of those kind of resistance Democrats who were walking away and being like, I'm done. Now I think they're back phone banking, they're back donating, they're definitely going to vote. They're fired up. And what happens with the fallout from the raid, I think, heavily influences whether you see that same energy on the right. So I wasn't terribly surprised to see these poll numbers, and I bet Mark Kelly's probably looking pretty strong in Arizona too.
I think that's right. Emily, how about you? How are you viewing things?
Well, and the difference there is that Mark Kelly, I think, is up against a really strong candidate, whereas you could not possibly ask for a better foil to John Fetterman, who is a great candidate, maybe one of the best candidates the Dems fielded this cycle, than Dr. Oz. He is just an absolutely atrocious candidate across the board. And interestingly enough, that speaks to how the right is sort of reacting to this new era, because Donald Trump got behind Oz specifically with the reasoning that he was electable, that Dr. Oz was most electable. And it's just a complete misunderstanding from Trump himself of why Trump was successful. Somebody who doesn't run away from the fact that he's made tons and tons of money. Whereas Dr. Oz, you see him pretending he's at a Wegmans, that he didn't even get the name correct. It was the most hilarious clip I've ever seen. He doesn't even know where he is. He's in a grocery store just pretending when he's looking for coup d'etat that he's just your regular Pennsylvanian. I mean, it's just outrageous. And so I think it's pretty clear. We'll start to see after August, when the money starts getting getting spent. We saw in Kansas, I think, the messaging get tested, and that brought in a lot of people who are not just reliable Democratic voters, but people in the middle, independent, swing voters. And when you have an opportunity to test the messaging like that and you see it be successful, and then you start putting money behind it when you get into the fall, September and October, I would expect that we see those numbers pretty similar through Election Day with Fetterman and Oz. Wisconsin is another story. I think Ron Johnson is a very different kind of candidate because he's actually been, he's sort of Trumpy, but he's been in office for a while now, and he has a record to run on. So I would expect that one to be a little tighter, and those Marquette polls are outliers.
Emily, you're from Wisconsin. I'm sure the audience probably knows that. But, you know, Johnson, maybe you can explain kind of what's going on there, which I think is interesting. Because you just had this lieutenant governor candidate actually lose the primary of the Scott Walker era. Johnson actually won during that time. Yet he's also kind of transformed himself into a MAGA warrior, but doesn't really change on policy. So how does he maintain his popularity in the state? And will he be able to, you know, he pulled an upset kind of in the last election. You think that's going to happen this time again?
I think it's very possible. I really would not rule out Ron Johnson. And I did a podcast with him a few months ago, just sort of talking through some of the stuff. And I think his MAGA transformation has been entirely authentic. I think he's been one of those people in the country who actually, you know, especially older Americans who have seen the direction of the country and have sort of gone into that wing of the party because of it. And so I think he's one of those people who can actually run on something that he, at this point, really believes. And he's been on I think Senate Intel for a long time, and has made a lot of decisions. He has been has his name on a lot of different investigations, especially as it relates to Russia, the Russia hoax, and the Intel community, which I don't think people really vote on. But I do think it's like an example of something you can say you've been doing in Congress, which again is different than Dr. Oz, and different than other candidates that Republicans have fielded this cycle. So I think one advantage he really has going for him is honestly that he's running on stuff he believes in, and he is sincere about it, and he's actually done work in that direction. And voters like that. They like that they feel like they can trust people. So I think it's a more difficult landscape than Republicans expected it to be. You have a built-in advantage if you're a Republican, and gas prices continue to be, north of $3.50 even. That's not great, and a less than stellar economy. So we'll see. With inflation, it's a built-in advantage. But he's an interesting candidate.
What do you think about the Wisconsin piece, Ryan? Because, Ron Johnson has gone in on some stuff, the steel stuff. This is a state that is very much a swing state, and he seems to have positioned himself on the fringe in terms of especially some of the election conspiracies.
Yeah, and I'd be curious if Emily agrees with this, but I think he got radicalized in 2016 when the Koch brothers and Mitch McConnell all kind of publicly abandoned his race, and they pulled their ads from him. And they said, he's going to lose to Russ Feingold. We need to put money elsewhere. At the time, a lot of polls had him down double digits. Like that was a race that Democrats had kind of checked the box on and said, all right, Ron Johnson's gone, Russ Feingold is coming back, and Johnson stormed back and ended up obviously winning that race, which is why he's still in office. And when he came back to the Senate after that, he was kind of a changed man, and that coincided with Trump's election. So his fury at the Republican establishment that had betrayed him in the election now had a vehicle that he could kind of ride with, and I think he has really very genuinely, it seems like, ridden in that vehicle. And like you said, on podcasts, in radio shows, like he'll just go wherever. Like he's become a just kind of wild, loose cannon. And I think that there is a genuine base for that, definitely within the Republican Party. But to your point about it being a swing state, I'm not sure that there's necessarily enough when it comes to independents. And that's what that poll showed, that Barnes had a double-digit lead among independents, whereas Evers only had a slight lead among independents, and that was the entire gap. So we'll see. Now, Barnes, though, is not well known, even though he's a lieutenant governor. And so I would think he needs at least this 7-point lead going into the last couple of months, because Johnson's going to have millions of dollars to paint him as radical and defunding the police, and we'll have, all those sorts of things. So I do think you're going to see that lead erode, and I think you can't count Johnson out because of his, major shocking comeback just 6 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's.
I was just going to say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that independent number is really important because that's who's exactly going to be attacked in the Johnson ads trying to tie Barnes to radical elements of the Democratic Party. And so that's the vulnerability. And to the extent that that's where he is now, that's where people should focus when they're looking at this race going into the fall for sure.
Emily, something I was curious about is, Krystal and I talk about this all the time. If you zoom out, you're like, obviously Republicans are going to win. You start to zoom in more, candidate quality, it's one of those things that gets debated ad nauseum. We have reams of data over the last decade or so that tell us the candidate quality has declined. But yet, candidate quality for Dr. Oz, for Herschel Walker, for many of these key races does seem to matter. So, how are you thinking about that in the individual characteristics versus the macro environment?
It's
curious. Yeah, curious for Emily's take. My quick take is that.
Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
When they were studying this, you didn't have this massive divergence of candidate quality. You didn't have Dr. Oz and
Herschel Walker wasn't running that.
he wasn't. But yeah, Emily, what's your read
that's
on
true.
that?
What do you think, Emily?
Well, so here's where it's really kind of interesting. Both Mitch McConnell's camp and the Trump camp would be extremely frustrated about candidate quality as they see it in the Republican field this election cycle. Because for the McConnells, you have the Herschel Walkers, you have those guys. And from the Trump perspective, you still have some establishment folks. And so I think it's the standard of what makes a quality candidate for the Republican Party. It's just completely different on two leading sides, whether you're at the RNC or you're in the camp of the head of the party, Donald Trump. You have a completely different take, and that's where you ended up electing people in primaries like Herschel Walker, because that sort of Trump litmus test, it's not always a perfect, as you can imagine, it's not always a perfect way to decide who's the quality candidate in any given race. And so that broader confusion, I think, has led, Saagar, to what you're saying on this micro level, a map that's really not as good as Republicans thought it would be.
Ryan, you really do directly have Trump to blame in a lot of these cases. And I mean, Herschel Walker, totally clear. They cleared the field for this guy. And then it was like, whoa, this is an issue. That should be a seat that's a layup for them. Pennsylvania should be a layup for them. And Saagar and I were both shocked at what a terrible... I would go so far as to say Dr. Oz is actually a worse candidate than Herschel Walker, because you're not just like, whoa, this guy's out of his depth. You're like, I hate this guy. I cannot, he's terrible. You have a visceral reaction to him. But even Emily mentioned Blake Masters before, who, was the sort of Trump kind of cleared the field for him in Arizona as well. He has some positions that are very out of the mainstream. He talked about privatizing Social Security. He wants a federal ban on abortions. These are things that make it very difficult for him to win in a state that is now, a swing state. And I would still say is hued red, but Mark Kelly is a strong candidate, has his own profile there, and, has a much better chance at winning because of some of these positions that have been taken. Even J.D. Vance is underperforming in Ohio now. Do I think J.D. Vance is going to win? Yes, but they're having to focus on this race and think about it and spend more money there than they ultimately expected. So, the MAGA base may like some of these candidates, but just in terms of the numbers and how they're performing, this has created a very difficult situation for Republicans, where not only are they now at a disadvantage to win the Senate, they're in a position Democrats could theoretically even gain ground in the Senate.
Yeah, I think you're right that J.D. Vance is probably fine in Ohio, but there have been polls that have been showing that race pretty close. Now, structurally, Ohio is so tough for Democrats; it's very hard to see. But your point is an excellent one, and it shows that there are multiple ways to be a bad candidate. There's the Herschel Walker way, there's the Dr. Oz way, and then there's the kind of Blake and J.D. Vance way, where you're smart, you're articulate, you have a roughly coherent ideology that you're presenting to voters. But it's anathema to a lot of swing voters. Like you said, some of the positions that he has taken, Blake Masters in Arizona, I think Mark Kelly is just going to absolutely wail away on, in the same way that kind of Ron Johnson is going to hammer away at some of Barnes's links to the kind of progressive left in Wisconsin. The difference will probably be that Kelly will be able to find a lot of just video of Masters just saying these things out loud, where Johnson's going to have to show pictures of Barnes at a Black Lives Matter rally, or otherwise kind of make these kind of bank shot connections. But yeah, I think Masters, while he's obviously a smart, articulate candidate with a coherent philosophy, is not a good candidate. It is not, and I think like Mitch McConnell, in other words, like would agree with that. He'd be like, this isn't the person I would put up if I'm trying to win a swing state in like Arizona.
It depends what Masters shows up. It depends what Masters shows up, right? Which is that sometimes he's talking about family policy and he's critiquing the fact that there's no child care subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act. And then sometimes he's talking about a national ban on abortion. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't know which one cancels
You know
each
which
other
one
out.
Mark Kelly's going to run ads on.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
already are running ads.
Yeah.
Just final thoughts, Emily, on that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and it's also to Democrats, national Democrats struggle with too. People who flirted with unpopular policies, whether it's like sex and gender, CRT, whatever it is, Republicans can use that. I don't know if that's something that will successfully work against Mark Kelly, but in other races, Ohio certainly, Wisconsin certainly, you'll definitely see that played. And it's just a good example of how both parties just are not serving constituents right now because of the distractions and because of the ways that people are forced to sort of float towards those polls, and we see that come out in general election season really clearly.
The last thing that I just have to note is, in the Pennsylvania race, you had on the Democratic side, the Democratic establishment thought Connor Lamb was the more electable one. They were worried Fetterman was, and Fetterman, as you said, Emily, I think is running one of the best campaigns in the country, in spite of the fact that he's been hobbled by, a serious health event. And then on the Republican side, they thought Dr. Oz was going to be the most electable one. So it can be hard to predict this whole electability thing, especially when your brain is rotted by Beltway conventional wisdom. Guys, great to see you both. Thank you so much. We'll be doing more of this.
We missed you guys. Thank you.
Miss you guys too.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Had an amazing show for everybody today. I actually really, really enjoyed today's show. It was fun to bring back the panel. So I guess my thoughts have changed. I do miss it deeply. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. As we said, premium subscribers, watch out for the email. I'm going to try and get it to arrive on time. We've been looking at some of the other back-end problems with that. We're always experimenting, making sure that everything is as smooth as possible. We heard you on the Vimeo YouTube debate. You will be getting both. If you want to help us out, we deeply appreciate it. As you can see, we do actually spend quite a bit of time making sure the customer's experience is as seamless as possible. I know that it's a little bit convoluted, but it's not as easy as just being on cable news and getting paid by a big pharma company.
Yeah, that's right.
To talk to 183,000 people.
We chose a different path.
Imagine if our audience was only 180. We'd be broke. Broke if it was only 183,000.
Yeah, couldn't do
Anyway,
it.
amazing. All right.
Love you guys. Appreciate you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here next week. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.